I was working the front desk at a Sydney hotel when an American man checked in and immediately asked where he could exchange his dollars for real Australian money. I viet von fee chadent toit told him Australian dollars are real Australian money. He clarified he meant the colorful Monopoly money he'd seen in photos. I explained that is our currency. He asked when we switched from real money to plastic. I said 1988. He told me that in America, paper money works fine and has for centuries, so why fix what isn't broken? I handed him his room key. He examined the plastic card and asked if Australia uses real keys anywhere or if everything here is fake. He was completely serious. I spend my time collecting these moments, not because they're funny, but because they reveal something deeper about how people see the world. Most channels just react. I decode the behavior. If that difference stands out to you, you already know where you belong. Later that week, a woman asked me why Australians drive on the wrong side. I explained we drive on the left, which is the correct side for Australia. She said that's the wrong side because in America, the right side is correct, and since America has more people, that makes it right by democracy. She asked if I'd ever considered that maybe Australia should switch to be less confusing for tourists. An American family got upset because the weather app said it was 24 degrees, but it felt warm outside. I explained that's Celsius, which is about 75 Fahrenheit. The father insisted his phone wasn't broken, and Australia needed to fix its thermometers, and that was just my first month. I work at a pharmacy in Melbourne, and an American tourist asked for Advil for his headache. I offered him ibuprofen, which is identical. He said he specifically needs Advil because that's what his doctor recommended. I explained Advil is just a brand name for ibuprofen, and the medication is exactly the same. He asked if Australian ibuprofen is FDA approved. I told him we're in Australia, so we use the TGA, our Therapeutic Goods Administration. He looked concerned and asked if that was a real regulatory body or just something Australia made up. I assured him it's real and very strict. He asked why Australia doesn't just use the FDA if it already exists. I explained that sovereign nations have their own regulatory agencies. Most people hear stories like this and stop at the laugh. I track the patterns behind them, how confidence turns into confusion, and how culture shapes logic. If you see the value in understanding that, not just mocking it, this channel was designed for you. He said that seems inefficient and asked if I had anything American that he could trust. I was holding a box of ibuprofen made by an American pharmaceutical company. He asked if it was the American version or the Australian version. They're identical. He bought it but said he'd only take half doses to be safe from foreign medicine. I'm a barista in Brisbane, and an American woman ordered a flat white. When I brought it to her, she sent it back because it wasn't hot enough. I remade it at standard temperature, which is quite hot. She sent it back again, saying in America, coffee is supposed to be burning hot. I explained that Australian coffee culture doesn't serve coffee at scalding temperatures because it burns the milk and ruins the taste. She told me she's been drinking coffee for 30 years and has never heard that. She asked if I could just microwave it for a minute. I explained that would destroy the coffee completely. She said that's how her mom always reheated coffee at home, and it was fine. I asked if her mom was a barista. She said no, but she made coffee every day, so she knew what she was doing. I suggested she try the flat white at our serving temperature, as it's crafted to taste better this way. She took one sip and said it was too cold, asked for a refund, and left. She gave us a 1-star review saying Australian baristas don't know how to make hot coffee. I drive for Uber in Perth, and I picked up an American couple from the airport. They immediately asked why I was sitting on the wrong side of the car. I explained that in Australia the driver sits on the right side because we drive on the left side of the road. The husband said that seemed backwards and dangerous. He asked if there are a lot of accidents because of the confusion. I told him Australians grow up with this system, so there's no confusion. His wife asked how long it would take Australia to switch to the American system. I said we've been driving on the left since cars were invented here. She said that's a long time to be wrong about something. Her husband asked if the steering wheel being on the right makes the car less safe. I explained it's designed for left-side driving, so it's actually safer. He said that doesn't make sense because in America, the safest cars have the steering wheel on the left. I pulled up to their hotel. He tipped me $5 American and asked if that was okay, since he hadn't exchanged money yet. I explained that Australian Uber doesn't require tipping, and also, I can't use American dollars at the grocery store. He looked confused and asked what I do with tips then. I said most Australians don't tip for standard service. He said that's sad and asked how service workers survive. I mentioned we have minimum wage laws. He kept his $5. I work at a servo in Adelaide, and an American asked me where the gas pumps were. I pointed to the petrol pumps right in front of him. He clarified he needed gasoline, not diesel. I explained that petrol is gasoline. We just call it petrol in Australia. He said that's confusing and asked why we don't call it gas. I mentioned that gas is short for gasoline, but we use petrol, short for petroleum. He said petroleum is oil, not gas. I tried to explain the etymology, but he interrupted to ask which pump had unleaded gas. I pointed to the unleaded petrol pump. He asked if Australian gas works in American rental cars. I confirmed it does. He pumped his petrol, came back inside, and asked why the price was so high. I explained it's measured in liters, not gallons. He asked how many liters are in a gallon. I said about 3.8. He did the math on his phone and got upset that Australian gas is more expensive than American gas. I mentioned that Australia is an island nation that has to import some petroleum products. He said that's not his problem, and America should send us cheaper gas. He paid and left. His wife apologized and said he gets cranky when things are different from home. I work at a bottle shop in Sydney, and an American man asked for a 6-pack of beer. I showed him our selection. He picked up a 6-pack and said the cans looked small. I told him they're 375 ml, which is standard in Australia. He asked how many ounces that is. I said about 12.7 ounces. He complained that American beers are 12 ounces, so why are Australian beers bigger and trying to get people drunk faster? I explained that 12.7 is bigger than 12, so Australian cans have more beer. He recalculated on his phone and accused me of using confusing measurements to trick tourists. I assured him milliliters are standard worldwide. He said America uses freedom units, not metric, and that's why America won the space race. I mentioned NASA uses metric. He said that's fake news. He asked if I had anything measured in real units. I offered him a pint, which is 570 ml. He asked how many ounces. I said about 19.2. He said that's not a real pint because American pints are 16 ounces. I explained that Australian pints are imperial pints, which are larger than US pints. He accused Australia of making up measurements. He bought a 6-pack, but mumbled about metric system conspiracies the whole time. I'm a tour guide in Cairns, and I was taking an American group to the Great Barrier Reef. One man asked how far offshore the reef was. I said about 50 kilometers. He asked how far that is in real distance. I converted it to about 31 miles. He said that's too far and asked if there was a closer reef. I explained the Great Barrier Reef is where it is, and 50 kilometers isn't that far by boat. He asked why Australia doesn't use miles like normal countries. I mentioned that most of the world uses kilometers. He said America doesn't, and America is the most important country, so everyone else is wrong. His wife asked if the reef was dangerous because of sharks. I explained that sharks are present, but attacks are extremely rare. She asked if the reef has lifeguards. I said no, it's open ocean. She asked how that's legal. I explained that Australia assumes adults can assess risk. Her husband asked if we measure shark attacks in metric too. I didn't understand the question. He said he was joking, but he seemed serious. On the boat, he complained that the temperature was listed as 28 degrees and kept asking why the water wasn't frozen. I explained Celsius to him 3 times. He said Fahrenheit makes more sense because 0 is cold and 100 is hot. I pointed out that in Celsius, 0 is freezing and 100 is boiling, which is also logical. He said water doesn't boil at 100 degrees because he's boiled water before and it was way hotter than that. I gave up. I work at a gym in Melbourne, and an American member asked why all the weights were in kilograms. I explained that Australia uses the metric system. He asked if the gym had real weights in pounds. I said no, but kilograms are the international standard. He said he can bench 225 pounds and doesn't know what that is in kilos. I told him about 102 kilograms. He looked at the weights and said, "That doesn't seem right, because 102 is less than 225. I explained that kilograms are heavier units than pounds. He accused me of making gym equipment confusing on purpose. I offered to help him convert his lifts. He said he'd just estimate and started loading plates randomly. After his set, he bragged that he just benched 100 kilos easy. I checked his bar. He'd loaded about 60 kilograms total. I didn't correct him. He told his friend on the phone that Australian weights are easier than American weights. His friend probably thinks he's gotten stronger. I work at a beachside restaurant in Bondi, and an American family came in for dinner. They ordered fish and chips, and when the food arrived, the father got upset that the portions were too large. He said, in America, fish and chips is an appetizer, not a full meal. I explained that in Australia, fish and chips is a proper meal. He said he didn't want to pay for something he didn't order. I reminded him that he did order it, and the menu had photos. He claimed the photos were misleading because they didn't show scale. His wife asked if we had anything smaller, like a kid's menu. I said we do, but fish and chips is the same portion. The father decided they'd eat what they could and asked for to-go boxes. I brought them takeaway containers. He asked why the boxes were so small. They were normal-sized. He tried to fit the fish in the box, and it didn't fit because he'd barely eaten any of it. He accused the restaurant of having incompatible food and container sizes. I offered a larger container. He said that's wasteful and bad for the environment. I agreed to wrap the fish in paper instead. He agreed. When the bill came, he was shocked by the total. I explained that Australian restaurants include tax in the menu price, and we don't have tipping culture, so the price is the price. He said that's deceptive because Americans are used to calculating tax and tips separately. I told him this way is actually clearer. He disagreed and said he felt ambushed by transparent pricing. He asked if he could pay in US dollars. I said no. He asked if I knew the exchange rate. I said roughly 1.5 Australian dollars per US dollar, but he needed to pay in Australian currency. He paid with a credit card and asked if he'd be charged a conversion fee. I said probably by his bank. He asked why Australia doesn't just use American dollars to make things easier for tourists. I suggested he could travel with Australian currency next time. He said that's unreasonable because Australia should accommodate Americans since they're the main tourists. I checked our booking system. Americans made up about 15% of our customers. He didn't want to hear it. As they left, he threatened to report the restaurant to the American embassy for unfair practices. I wished him luck. His daughter apologized and said her dad gets like this every vacation. She seemed exhausted. Australia isn't trying to confuse Americans. We're just being Australian. If decoding human behavior like this gives you clarity, imagine having that insight every week. Patterns that explain not just tourists, but people everywhere. I'll keep mapping it. Subscribing just means you stay ahead of the curve. But somewhere right now, an American is confidently explaining to a Sydney taxi driver that kangaroos should be in zoos, not on the road, because that's how America handles wildlife.